All right, sorry for that lag. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Today, you guys are attending our Eliminating Fraud Through the Impression Lifecycle Tech Talk. This is Ogury's first Tech Talk, one of many we hope, but thank you for taking the time to join us today from wherever you are. My name is Samira Najad. I work in product marketing here at Ogury. We're really happy to welcome our SVP of Product, Antoine, along with Roy Rosenfeld, the SVP of Product at DoubleVerify, and Umberto Cruz, VP and Head of Digital at Havas. We have representation today from all sectors of the supply chain when it comes to protecting your brand against fraud. You know, of course, DoubleVerify is a leading solution for media authentication and quality. Havas is a media agency that deeply considers ad quality in every buy. And here at Ogury, we're an advertising technology that delivers branding campaigns on mobile, and we really focus on brand protection. That includes using safe data to deliver relevant ads in brand safe and fraud-free environments. So happy to welcome you guys, our audience here today, and to welcome our speakers. I'll pass it over to each of you guys to tell me a little bit more about yourselves and your experience working with fraud in your careers. Let's start with you, Roy.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having us today. My name is Roy. I run ad measurement products for DoubleVerify, and within that, the Fraud Lab, who is tasked with identifying new and emerging fraud and protecting all of our clients and partners from it. I've been at DV working on fraud for about 10 years, and prior to that, I was in the cybersecurity space. So I can say that I've been working with different types of fraud for most of my career. And I think it's a privilege to be able to work on such an important task, which essentially deals with eliminating cybercrime from our industry.
Great, thank you, Roy. How about you, Antoine?
Hey, Samira. Hey, everyone. Really glad to be virtually here with you guys. So my name is Antoine Barbier. I lead product at Ogury. My background is very much in digital advertising. For the past 13 years, I joined Ogury about 6 months ago. Before Ogury, I was working for a DSP named TubeMogul, which was acquired by Adobe back in at the end of 2016. Brand safety and fraud protection, as you can imagine, has been top of mind since my early times in advertising. So, example, in 2016, we were the first DSP with TubeMogul to issue automated refunds to any advertisers whose ads were served on non-human traffic. And fast forward to today, at Ogury, brand protection is very central to our product investments. And I'm excited to talk more about what we are doing and how this partnership are also helping us and our brands fighting fraud.
Great. Thank you so much, Antoine. Hi, Umberto.
Hi, Samira. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I'm very excited. I'm working as a head of digital at Havas, working with representing the Miami office specifically. And Antoine and Roy mentioned, I think it's important. I think all backgrounds are like from different angles and perspectives. In my case, from the agency side, I've been having the opportunity to work at Havas for a while, and I've been witness of the entire evolution of the prevention in terms of ad fraud. At Havas, we have been going all the way down from managing this very manually, and then starting to work more and more with automated and tech solutions. I remember in 2015 we launched the Meta Quality Barometer. There was a global solution that was including technology, including also context, and also content was a huge piece, and it still is. But yes, I'm pretty sure we're gonna discuss more in deep. So very happy to be here today.
Yes, thank you guys so much. It's awesome to have all different perspectives of the ad supply chain here represented, and all of us have a common interest that we want to protect the brands working within the ad tech world from fraud. So let's start our discussion today kind of by discussing the severity of this problem. Ad fraud is huge in our industry, and what it does is intercept our brands' ability to make that impact that they want to make. The expected loss just this year is in the billions. How many billions is widely up for debate and very hard to quantify. Let's start with a background on fraud in the media industry. How has it impacted campaigns historically, and how has it evolved over time? Starting with you, Roy.
Sure. So I think the way we look at fraud is it's a chance for fraudsters to make an easy buck. The reason it exists is I think the incentive. That's always the first thing you need to think about when you're into these kind of situations. And the incentives online has always been the fact that online media is a very complex system and there are many corners or ways for fraudsters to kind of hide. When we look back over the last 10 or so years, it started on the web when most of the transactions were around web pages, articles, URLs, stuff like that. So you would have illicit browser extensions injecting ads onto pages or bots running in the background behind your visible browser. But as the media industry evolved into mobile a few years back, fraudsters just moved together with that focus, because where the money goes, where the eyeballs go, fraud is shifting together with just because this is where their opportunity is. So we've seen fraudsters take advantage of this new mobile vector by infecting mobile devices, creating fraudulent apps, creating new forms of app spoofing that didn't exist before. And we've been chasing them around, trying to stay one step ahead of them. And then more recently, we've seen fraud moving into OTT and into CTV. Again, over the last couple of years, CTV advertising is exploding, more so during COVID. And so you just see how fraudsters begin to take advantage and search for loopholes within emerging media. And so today we track bots and other types of fraudulent activity all the way from web through mobile and in CTV.
Awesome. So the fraudsters follow the money. So interesting to see that. How about you, Antoine, from your perspective?
Very true. For ad tech companies like us, like at Ogury, I think the main focus has been and is still to provide the best-in-class protection tools to marketers while ensuring that it does not stand in the way of campaign effectiveness. So as you may know, Ogury's DNA is very much in mobile advertising. And like Roy was mentioning, like if you put things in perspective, fraudsters are following the money. Like mobile ad spending in 2020 is projected to represent around 67% of the digital ad spend in the US. So again, like that's meaningful. And we have seen through the years many forms of fraud in the mobile application ecosystem, specifically like fake impressions, fake clicks, like, you know, the basics, but still. Mobile app ecosystem works differently than the web ecosystem when it comes to user identification, apps being active in the background, just to name a few examples. So it's very important, and we've seen that happening, that the industry has had to adapt to these new environments to provide efficient ways to eliminate fraud through client and server-side solution. And that's interesting to see, like where it's going. Also, like Roy was talking about OTT, and you know, it's obviously an unending fight that we are on.
Definitely. And our last perspective is Umberto from the agency side. How do you guys assess fraud in the past and looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean, in the past, we were looking at it from the general invalid traffic, and then it started to evolve. Like I mentioned in the intro really briefly. We used to do things manually in the past when it started, and then after that, when it became like more sophisticated with sophisticated invalid traffic, we had to partner with tech companies like such as DoubleVerify in this case, and working with ad tech companies such as Ogury to be sure and make sure that this invalid traffic is reduced. I mean, we have to see it from a technology angle, from a technology perspective. I think that is really important, but also on the labor side, on the professional side. So we are at Havas creating, besides the trading desk that you're very familiar, some of you are very familiar with, we have a global trading desk from Havas that it does all the way down programmatic social performance campaigns. But besides that, we have a very strong layer of ad operators. So these guys, they have their huge responsibility to make sure that not only like ad fraud is prevented, but also increasing like the brand safety, and also in some cases viewability is like ensured. So yeah, so I think from the agency perspective, it's like how we connect the dots between the ad tech companies like and technology companies such as DoubleVerify and Ogury in this case.
Yeah, so if every layer is providing protection, that's the best bet. It is interesting to see that the fraudsters are evolving, and all of us within the ecosystem have to stay vigilant. So looking a bit forward, Roy, what do you think are the trends that are coming to the forefront and things that we should know to address? I know we got a question that's a little bit related to this, and we have about 10 to 15 for questions at the end, so keep dropping them in, but just starting here from trends going forward.
Sure. So I think that, again, if we focus on where the money is flowing, where people are spending the time, that's increasingly video delivered OTT, whether this is on mobile, whether this is on CTVs. For some people like myself, it's both at the same time. Like I'm watching something on Netflix and on my phone at the same time, right? So what we see fraudsters are doing is essentially trying to target that. And in OTT and video, there's an interesting combination of factors that, if we're not careful, can make it easier for them. Because in video, there are some aspects that are there to facilitate media buying that's more effective and more fluent and creates a more a nicer user experience. And I'm talking about server-side ad insertion and protocol like VAST. Those are great for executing media transactions, but one of the challenges with them is they often create an environment where for fraudsters, it's easier to hide or to lurk in the shadows just because of how the technology operates. And what some of the things that we did in DV is to build completely new stacks for fraud detection within those dedicated environments. So how do you deal with an environment that doesn't support JavaScript? How do you deal with an environment where a seller can just declare the app, the video, the user? How do you deal? How do you verify that? How do you protect from that? So we've been seeing fraudsters shift into those areas where demand is high, supply is more limited, CPMs are high, and there are technical sort of like reasons that can or aspects that can make fraud easier to get away from. And so we've been constantly analyzing risk across the ecosystem, thinking like fraudsters, and then trying to get ahead of them by developing solutions that specifically targets those pockets of inventory or those scenarios where new fraud can take place.
Yeah, that's fascinating that they go for the over-the-top and high-value video placements. That's where our brands want to be and where they have a huge impact to make. And on the same side, the fraudsters are thinking the same way, that this is their chance to grab those big budgets or go for the more expensive placements. So now we're going to turn this over to our audience. We have a quick question for you guys with a new understanding about fraud looking back. We're interested to know, what are you most concerned about when you have a media campaign? Is it your desktop and mobile web app, or mobile web buys? Is it your mobile app, your tablet, or CTV? So we understand that you guys are constantly assessing risk in your buys as well. So curious to know what you guys think. There's a poll you can answer on the right side. And I already see some answers coming in, and I definitely see some questions as well. So thank you guys so much for engaging. We're definitely going to have a chance to get to those questions at the end. So I'll let those poll answers come in, and we have an interesting one here too. It's basically no surprise to all of us. We're online remotely now, and we're online every day. Internet usage during the COVID-19 pandemic has gone up by close to 70%, according to Forbes. We're all spending more time at home on our phones. This increase in traffic is actually really great for our industry. However, it makes it more important than ever that we take the time to assess what type of fraudsters are coming and trying to take a share of that traffic. One of the things at Ogury that we really focus on is, of course, we're a performance-focused provider. We want our campaigns to deliver well and really meet our brand's performance goals, but we always balance that with the idea that if this isn't a fraud-free campaign, that impact is being stolen. So, Antoine, from your perspective, how would a partner like Ogury balance that competing goals of always protecting the brand while delivering performance?
Yeah, and I think, I'm sure it's the case for all of us players in the industry, but safe, quality, performance is very much the ultimate goal for Ogury. It starts, for us, it starts with advertising in front of real users, which is actually ingrained in our DNA when collecting consent. We started Ogury in 2014 with this simple mission, which was to build technology to establish an advertising ecosystem chosen by the user. So, we have this collected consent to start. On top of that, our campaigns focus on mobile app brand advertising. So we work with a network of known publishers. We have direct SDK integrations. We manually vet for quality and brand safety. So that's one layer. We work with vendors like DV on Prebid solutions. So we activate that. We are being mobile advertising specialists. We have also developed our own solutions, the latest one being our app spoofing prevention solution. So ultimately, we drive performance against our brand's KPI, with our tools, with our SDKs, but we also give them peace of mind of knowing that those results are fully valid and not bolstered by bots and non-human traffic.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that speaks a lot to us as like a mobile in-app provider that are definitely fraudsters who want to take advantage of this type of environment. So these tools are really essential for us, and we definitely go above and beyond to make sure they're in place. Umberto, can you add your media perspective, of course, in the perspective of balancing performance with these kind of fraud prevention capabilities?
Of course. I think it has to do with on the two angles. The way that we see it, we start with education with our clients. Try to put all the same level of awareness it's from the advertisers to understand the relevancy of this and how is this impacting performance and the quality of their campaigns. And then that's one thing. And the other side is making sure that the actual tech stacks and the ecosystems that we work, because in agencies we tend to work with multiple tech stacks and ecosystems, it's aligned on either our partners and also clients' objectives. And it's also helping us to decrease the level of ad fraud exponentially, working in automated solutions and give our clients the transparency, because that is also important, not keep that behind the curtain. So explain the client, start with education and give them the transparency. Also explain in the results, why is this generating a volume of positive impact for their business? So it's not just for them to invest their media dollars and just think about it that it's happening, but also give them the transparency. It's about education and transparency on this side.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you say that, because I do notice that when we receive RFPs, that's a conversation that we're having more often. Our advertisers and buyers are asking, what can I do about this? What type of protections are you offering me? What type of certifications? They're insisting on more protection upfront rather than just simply measuring the level of fraud that a campaign drives post-impression and evaluating partner performance after the campaign is run, after the fraudsters have been paid. So all of you out there, I encourage you to also take that step as you pursue partners to ask up front, what are your protections that are in place? Is it proprietary? Are you using a tool like Double Verify? What type of certifications you have? Just in that vein, I'm interested for our media buyers out there. We have a poll for you. We want to know, when you're planning that media campaign, what fraud requirement do you request from your partners? Do you insist on a pre-bid fraud protection solution? Do you rely on post-bid measurement? So after the campaign, you assess partner quality based on what level of fraud that you see in the reporting? Or finally, is your answer number 3, I don't ask my partners about fraud? We would love to hear your feedback if you just go to the right and answer in the poll. And while you guys do that, I'm going to ask Umberto about his media buying perspective and what type of conversations you have with your brands about what they request about fraud.
Of course, I think it's also partnering, not obviously partnering with the right tech companies and our partners, but also partnering and being part of organizations. We're trying to follow AAV, MRC standards, of course, but also we try to be part of other organizations such as TAG, for instance, the Trustworthy Accountability Group. Havas just became one of the first media large media companies and communications group to be part of that certifications beside publishers and tech companies. It's also important because it helps us to expand and share that need with our publisher, with our partners, and also it gives credibility. It gives credibility with your clients. It gives credibility and also helps you to improve and results, and also the inventory. And the second is standardizing out fraud prevention process. So aligning these organizations' requirement with your internal clients' needs, and also making them one. And also at the end of the day, I think like advertisers should leverage on agencies to be the gatekeepers of ad fraud prevention. So that's important for us. So it's a huge responsibility. That's why like making those partnerships and ensuring that following those standards, such from the tag like certification and that tag group, for instance, is very important.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Humberto. The next question we have actually encompasses a lot of questions that you guys are chiming in on. Basically, what we're asking is, we have a good idea of the problem, fraudsters coming in, and there's a laundry list of the ways that they do fraud. They do spoofing, they do fake clicks, bots, traffic, so many different types, but we know that the best moment to block everything is pre-bid. So pre-bid fraud avoidance is one of Double Verify's specialties. Ogury actually has built proprietary technology for this as well. Can we talk a bit about why pre-bid is the right moment in the impression lifecycle to block fraud? We have a number of questions actually coming in about this.
Sure. So I think that if you think about what Prebid is, really it's at the beginning of your investment funnel, right? So if you think about how fraud can impact, if you're blocking that initial purchase of fraudulent inventory, you're not just protecting your investment or your media budget, you're also preventing fraud from contaminating your ad server account, contaminating your click measurement system, contaminating your install measurement system, contaminating your actual CRM on your site. If that bot then goes on to visit your site and kind of browse through the site, and then your attribution funnels. So really it protects almost your entire marketing funnel from Prebid onward. So it's definitely from an investment perspective and activation, that's the best place to start. And then if you think about how do you get that executed, so someone like DV, we've recognized that really the two most critical components are coverage and speed or velocity. And that's because you have so many types of fraud, you can't just identify some of them, because then fraud will always find a way to sit through the cracks. So you need to be able to identify multiple types of fraud. And then velocity is really critical, because what we've seen is that when a device, for example, gets infected with malware that creates ad fraud in the background, it's usually very quick to abuse that device and creates most of this damage in the first 24, maybe 48 hours. So disseminating information about newly infected devices or new fraud schemes that we find almost on a weekly basis, sending that information and activating the protections in a Prebid environment needs to be done super quickly. That's why we do this over 100 times a day. We send updates to our Prebid partners to facilitate early protection. And so if you combine those two things, coverage and velocity, and you examine most of or all of the available dimensions, what's the device, who's the user, what's the app, what's the site, who's the seller, and other dimensions available in the RTB environment, that's how you maximize protection at the ideal place in your activation funnel.
Definitely. And we definitely mirror that approach at Ogury as well. Antoine, can you talk a bit about our app spoofing prevention?
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned, we are very much mobile advertising experts. And so when you look at the mobile advertising ecosystem, one of the main fraud techniques is app spoofing. So what is app spoofing? In fact, app spoofing consists of the following: like fraudsters are going to steal ad spend by disguising themselves as by disguising a low quality or low volume app as a well-known publisher. So we will say they will disguise themselves as the Wall Street Journal. This fraudulent app, let's call it bad app, places a bid request while pretending to be the Wall Street Journal. In that case, the advertisers, the buyers are going to be tricked into buying ad space, as they believe that this bad app is actually the Wall Street Journal, and they are prepared to pay a high price to be placed on a premium, obviously a premium media, or what they think is a premium media. Ultimately, what happens is that the ad is never placed, as you can imagine, on the Wall Street Journal. Bad app intercepts the advertising spend, and that's purely wasted advertiser budgets. What we've done on our side at Ogury is using our technology and due to our unique view of device app possession, so which apps are installed on a device, we are able to check in real time if a bid request is created by a legitimate device. Meaning by that, like if I take back my example, we would notice that actually the Wall Street Journal is not installed on this device, and therefore we would be able to flag Prebid that this request is fraudulent.
Awesome. Yeah, Prebid is definitely the way to go. And I know on the agency side, you guys are aware as well, right, Umberto?
Of course. I mean, Prebid is extremely important on the agency side, and it happens. I mean, at least in the actual buying process, it happens on biddable platforms. The majority happens on DSPs. So it's important for you to have a strong. I mean, from the agency side and from Havas, we try to do that. We try to incentivize that every single buy that we do. It's a requirement actually. Like every single buy that we do from a programmatic perspective is having a filter for Prebid protection and fraud prevention. So it's extremely important. It helps us reduce, as Roy was mentioning, significantly the level of ad fraud. And then you have other ways of the process, but that is really very important. Either if you're tracking it directly or adding it on the DSP, or you need to do or connect with other parts of the tech stack, such as the ad server, it's extremely important. So we tend to be mark that as a check in every single buy that we do in programmatic spaces.
Yeah, definitely. And it's definitely the partners and I hope I wasn't on mute. Yeah, it's definitely the partners and the agencies that suffer, because when we report that fraud back to our clients, of course, nobody wants to pay for it. So often we find that the agencies are refunding these. So the fraudsters are getting paid, and the media partner and the agency has to refund. How do you find, Umberto, this process is going? I know it's changing a bit with agencies seeking the refunds from their partners and giving that back to their brands as well.
Yeah, I mean, it happens because at the end of the day, we can prevent, we can reduce the level of ad fraud, but it's never going to be zero. That's a reality. We have to be realistic here. And yes, when those situations happen, we have to be, and it's very important to have that level of trust and transparency all the way down with the partners that we are working, and also extending that and sharing that communication with our clients. So when there is a yellow flag or a red flag or something that is happening in real time that can be detected, we immediately tell the client, we immediately involve the client. So that is extremely important, because at the end of the day, we're trying to find solutions for them. But at the end of the day, we see them as a business partners. They have to be part of the conversation. It's important. That's why I mentioned the education piece at initially. It's key because it helped them to have the tools to manage that communication, that conversation. We are there to guide them. We are there obviously to work on and talk on their behalf. But at the end of the day, it's extremely important to involve them on that conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And I hope that answered your question, Corinne. We know that pre-bid protection is king, but let's actually discuss the full scope of the impression lifecycle. So in some cases, fraud occurs. Of course, we only know after the fact. So this goes along with the idea that sometimes that our course of action is to refund our brands for that fraud, or to ask our partners for those impressions dollars back. After campaigns have run, how can we as players within this life cycle of the impression learn and grow and adapt our solutions based on the fraud that's identified? Antoine, maybe you can talk about Ogury's solution.
Yeah, sure. In fact, like Roy mentioned it, fraud techniques are evolving at a super rapid pace. Like I think he was mentioning hundreds of updates on a daily basis. And so it's not realistic to expect that all fraud will be identified pre-bid, right? So obviously you need to have a plan. You want to make sure that your partners are actively managing the solutions tools you are using. So obviously updating it, I'm sure it's automated, but make sure you are leveraging the latest versions of the tools out there. Make sure you question it. Again, I love when Roy was talking about specificities of environments, right? There are pockets of inventory. All these pockets of inventory are different. And so asking questions to your partners, educating yourself, understanding so what you can ask question and validate through your partners that, they have the right mindset and right thinking, I think is key. It's complex, but, you should go for it. I guess that, on our side, we, DV, if I take the example of app spoofing prevention, we are updating on a regular basis all our learnings from the patterns we are seeing out there, so that we learn after the fact, so that we can feed our Prebid solutions.
Yeah, definitely. How about you, Roy? How is the learning that we do in the past applied for the future of campaign management?
Yeah, I think that what's interesting about, so Prebid is highly scalable, highly automated, super fast. So you really are, I don't want to say limited, because that's not negative, but you're limited to automated tools, right? If you are going to have an effective protection there. What's interesting on the post-bid side is that it really enables the human aspect to shine. So the way we think about post-bid is that's our chance as Double Verify, as Ogury, as buyers, as sellers, as platforms, to look at the data that does get through Prebid filtration and focus on, okay, the fraud that's happening, why is it actually happening? Identify who you're actually in business with. And that's so critical. That's actually not an aspect of technology, that's an aspect of business, right? But okay, which apps are actually showing the fraud? Who's selling those? Why did it happen? Is it because the fraud is very fast to move? Is it because this person or entity is selling inaccurate information in the auction environment? And really focus on those bits of information to identify those pockets of inventory and action against them. So you might be able to use this information to identify a seller that's extremely sophisticated in how they're doing fraud. You might be able to identify specific schemes or servers that are involved. So really, that's a great additional layer to identify and involve human analytics and expertise in identifying who you're in business with and being able to take action against that.
Yeah, definitely. So it definitely has to feed our solutions, and you guys are like detectives identifying and applying that knowledge and doing investigations. Umberto, from the agency side, how are you guys doing the touch points and the learnings from past campaigns?
Of course. I mean, I think the learnings that we have been getting across the board and complementing, I couldn't be more agree with what Antoine and Roy when they had just mentioned. I think it's extremely important also see it the other way. Like it's helped us. I mean, Postbid helps us a lot to prevent and to reduce that and to understand and getting those learnings, but also could work other way around. It happens to us in the past that there were some like partners, some publishers, certain level of inventory that was flagged as fraud, but it was based, and depending of the context, it was not fraud, depending of what was the client like objective. We can discuss about like categories such as news that are living in a very thin line. So it depends on what the objective is. It helps you to get learnings. So coming up from those learnings, I mean, I'll suggest from the agency side, always we tend to do like when it comes to Postbid, first, do a proper ongoing assessment for active campaigns. Second, create benchmarks of accepted market ad fraud levels. And third, align with publishers and ad tech companies to adopt and respect those benchmarks for each advertiser. At the end of the day, this could help us to reduce like ad fraud to the minimum.
Yeah, I definitely think the idea of benchmarks is great because as we've all identified, fraud will never be 0% realistically, and there's many types of fraud we can only learn about after the fact. So if we have the pre-bid tools in place, we know we've done what we can. And if we are partnered with companies that are actively using the assessments of fraud after the fact as a leading point for their investigation, we're kind of doing everything that we can throughout that impression lifecycle to make sure we're addressing this and that we're learning, adapting alongside these really tricky, evolving fraudsters. And it also is important because our opportunities are changing all the time, the type of traffic, the volume, the new platforms. So it's definitely an important topic, and we actually have quite a few really interesting questions on that. The one that I'm interested in having your perspective on, Roy, is from Alex Lynn. He says, what efforts do you think we as an industry should do to combat fraud outside of blocking the sources and identifying? Should we be pushing for legislation and harsher criminal punishments? I think it's really interesting because while we think of this as just like bots, this is real criminal activity, and I wonder how you approach that.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think we would want to see harsher actions and more legislations, but I think the reality is that even if it will happen, it will take time to materialize, right? And justice sometimes, especially in the law enforcement system, just might take more time. And I think that it's up to us to not kind of like stand on the sideline and wait for that to happen. And the way we think about this, I'm going to go back to just smart way of doing business again. We often see cases where, so we've had these cases where we block fraud for one of our partners, and then we see it pop up somewhere else from an inventory source or a platform that we haven't been working with. And so I think as an industry, we just have to recognize that it's critical for each one of us to take action, to use the right tools, to ask the right question about who you're working with. Have you implemented AdTXT? Have you implemented Setters.json? Do you have Prebid protection? Are you offering transparency into your supply chain? And can I see where I'm running on? And be able to ask those questions of each other to just know who you're working with. Because I think as long as there are significant either buyers or sellers or platforms that do not hold themselves up to those higher standards of quality, that do not use the full powers of their tools and the technology that's available to stop fraud, whenever we stop fraud on one end, it's going to come back from the other end. And not only that, the people we work with can also recognize who it is that's applying to your platform. You know, we often see fraudsters who just switch up the facade, like the where the office is located or the website, and they just come back. And so if as an industry we don't have better ways and we don't enforce stricter vetting on the inventory sources on our partners, you know, it doesn't matter what law enforcement is going to do, fraud is going to continue and stay active. So I really think, you know, as we think back through the last 10 years, the last 2 years, is we've seen an awakening across the industry as everyone now understand what fraud is and the risk. But I think we still see cases where you know, a platform will really want to increase their level of inventory, so they will onboard partners and maybe will relax some of the quality standards. Or a buyer would want to make sure they can spend whatever it is their spend target is, or user acquisition, and they will just relax some of the guidelines to hit those targets. And I think that many cases, this is where we fail. We just have to hold ourselves to higher standards.
Yeah, that's great feedback. And I do see on some of the questions we have some input from Nikolay Doktorov. I hope I said your name right, but he's working on the publisher side and on the desktop mobile web space. He's implemented a world-class bot protection layer and working carefully with ads.txt and sellers.json. So we know that many of the people on the publisher side are really taking to heart the fact that these protections are inherent in protecting their business models. Do you guys know from the publisher side what more they can do to just ensure their traffic is not taken over by bots? A bit more from the publisher angle than the brand and buying side.
Yeah, I can try and cover that. I think that we often talk about tools like AdTXT and Setters.json, and it's also mentioned in this question. And I think that a key element that we've seen here is how those tools are being used, right? Like, so if I'm a publisher and I work with 200 entities that facilitate ad transaction for my site or for my app, and I don't necessarily know who those folks are, that makes it much more difficult, right? So you definitely, as a publisher, as a creator, you want to maximize your yield and your revenue, but you need to understand who you're working with. So even if you're using those tools, you want to make sure that you are actually being smart about it. You're vetting your monetization partners. You understand the value. You know that they're not just going to take your inventory and then multiply it by 5 and falsify half of it, right? Which we've seen in the past. And so you really need to conduct inventory or monetization hygiene on your end. The other thing we've seen is that you want to really, when you're thinking about solutions to apply on your site, if you're not looking at 100% organic data and you're actively augmenting your site either with audience extensions, which is you're buying inventory to supplement what's on site, you have to make sure you're using protection for that against fraud. And if you're actually buying traffic from social or even from other tier one search engines and stuff like that, bots are not the only risk. You have stuff like hijacked devices. You have other things that can lurk on a real user machine. So you want to implement solutions that protect your entire sphere of value rather than just bots. So I would focus on those two angles.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we all have a part to play, not only with the publisher side, but all of the exchanges and all of us on the media side as well. I think that aligns very closely, Antoine, with Ogury's position of being very close to our publisher partners with our direct SDK integrations and just that eye on our supply. We also worry beyond just fraud protection for the whole suite of brand protection. So, of course, that is our consent collection and our data safety, but also what we haven't touched here and all of our brands are concerned about beyond fraud is brand safety and even viewability. So I know DV has tools for assessing quality across the entire metric. Umberto, from the agency side, how do you guys assess and reward those partners that you work with that are having a more holistic view of protection for that brand?
I think, I mean, in this case, it's something that the more interactions and the more transactions that start having with like either like tech partners or publisher like partners, it's about trust and about consistency. So, and if we see that it's a certain like technology is helping us to reduce significantly, we're constantly comparing and testing. I mean, we work with the DVs of the world, but we also work with the other companies too. So it happens to be that sometimes certain partners working best for certain categories and some others like for other categories. So it depends, and we're assessing that. And obviously, and like I mentioned from the beginning, having that conversation and transparency back to the clients, to the advertisers, and explaining them, look, we have been running these benchmarks, these tests across the board with these multiple partners, and these ones are working best for both tech, traffic and ad fraud prevention, and also for inventory as well. So doing this like types of benchmarks is very healthy because it helps us understanding what works best for each category and specific clients, and also to reward them as you're mentioning. And the way that we reward them is keep it the consistency working with them, like consistently and increasing the media dollars and increasing the amount of projects that we work with them. That's the way that we are like trying to work more and more.
Yeah, it's definitely the larger question of media quality there. We just have a few minutes left, so I'm going to actually go with the very first question we received towards the beginning of the session from Sai Praneeth Gunuputi. Hope I pronounced that right, but this is a very forward-looking question, and I think we've done a great job in this session of looking back at the historical perspective of fraud, looking at our current moment with COVID and all of the opportunities that fraudsters have with the increased traffic, but also looking ahead and giving recommendations for both the brands and publisher sides about what type of methods they should put in place. So Sai's question is, will fraud increase on iOS 14? So a very forward-looking question and kind of a great one to wrap up on. Any ideas about how iOS 14 and its release might affect fraud?
Maybe I can share a few thoughts on that. Like, I suspect that Say is referring back to the do not track, which likely is going to be enforced as it will be more prominent in the user flow on iOS 14. I don't know if I would expect fraud to increase on this one. That's an interesting question. It may be seen as an opportunity. What I was going to say is the result of that, so not having an identifier, an advertising identifier, which would result from the users opting out in some fashion from or limiting ad tracking, is already a use case which the industry has been dealing with for the past, in fact, I may say something wrong, but at least few years. And so I suspect that vendors like DV already have patterns also to understand like the proportion in traffic of opted out or requests which are coming with a non-identifier or a zero identifier. And so it will likely be a question of maintaining and making sure that this new trend of seeing less identifier to be taken into account in the patterns. But that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. Definitely, unless you guys
Yeah.
have. Oh, go ahead, Roy.
Yeah, I can just add to that that oftentimes changes like this, they don't really affect fraud in increasing it. They just change the way fraud can extract or try to extract value. So Antoine touched upon the fact that do not track will kick into higher gear with mobile identifiers being less available. I think some other things that we expect to happen is that location data might become harder to get because there are some restrictions on that, etc. And really the only thing the only way it affects fraud is that we expect to see fraudsters try and take advantage of that. So we might see an increase in how they spoof location, right? Or how they still maintain inventory identifiers in order to maintain high CPMs and stuff like that. And for us, right, it is essentially another signal that we can try and track back and to identify if it's normal or abnormal, right, when we investigate and try to identify fraud. But for fraudsters, it's just a vector that they can apply their techniques on. So we don't expect it to necessarily increase fraud as much as it's another step in its evolution, and it continues to evolve with the industry.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for your feedback on that question, for all of the questions, and thank you to the audience who submitted questions and stayed engaged, answered our polls, joined us today. We're so excited to be able to have had this conversation with you, representing, 3 different perspectives. Please join our next Ogury Tech Talk. You guys will probably hear through the same marketing channels that you heard about this one from, and thank you so much for our speakers today. We'll talk to you guys soon, and you guys will all receive a recording of the session.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.